Solo Leveling by Chu Gong. Chapter 44 Part 1 Omen of Destruction. A man sneaked into the large hospital. He was on high alert due to the oil canister he was holding. His eyes, usually lackluster, burned with passion. How dare they look down on me? He was prepared to die. After wandering around for a while, he found the perfect spot, a hallway with very little foot traffic. He began methodically dousing the area with the oil he had brought. You think I'd go down alone? A week earlier, he had been stumbling down the street completely wasted and picked a meaningless fight with a stranger. He'd been beaten up badly and carted off to the hospital. When he regained consciousness, he'd insisted that the doctor stop treating him because he lacked funds. It was at that moment he saw the way the doctor had looked at him, as if he was utterly pathetic. That bastard doctor. The details of his face had grown fuzzy over the past week, but the man would never forget that look. He had resolved to get his revenge, which was why he had returned to the hospital. Reaching old age had never been part of his life plan anyway. After meticulously covering every corner, he poured whatever fuel remained over his own head. "I'm taking you with me," he spat. Of course, he wouldn't be able to burn down the entire hospital given its size, but he could at least take a few people with him. If the doctor was one of them, that'd be the icing on the cake, but he wasn't too hung up about it. Gambling debts had ruined his life, but he had no intention of fading into the shadows like others in his situation. He threw the empty canister away and pulled out a lighter. One flick, one spark, and this tedious life would be over. Expressionless, he braced his thumb and paused as he felt a cold breeze. A breeze? He sensed something was off and checked his surroundings. How could wind be blowing in a windowless corridor? What's going on? His hand was suddenly gripping the air. He looked down to see that the lighter had vanished. How bizarre. He searched the floor in case he'd accidentally dropped it, but his search was in vain. Where the heck did it go? He furrowed his brow and looked up from the floor. He caught sight of something huge and black standing in front of him. It was an insect with hands and feet. The man's eyes were about to pop out of his head. The insect stretched out its hand and covered the man's mouth before he could let loose a scream. "MPH! KH. The insect raised its other hand and pressed its index finger to its lips. "Shoo!" The soldier couldn't let this man cause a fuss, as the young woman his king had asked him to protect was sleeping in a room nearby. The would-be arsonist put up a fight, but the insect didn't even flinch. "NGH, MMPH." The image of Baru's mandibles reflected on the widened pupils of his victim. Why level 101? Jinwoo mulled over the sudden upgrade of his skills as he smoothly drove back to the guild office. It didn't happen at level 100. He'd been under the impression that any significant changes would happen at level 100, but his job-exclusive skills had gone up a level at 101. Instead, he ran through multiple theories and landed on two that struck him as most likely. The first was about the significance of the number 1. 1 symbolized beginnings, so maybe a limitation on his skill level had been lifted once Jinwoo's overall level had reached 101. Otherwise, Jinwoo's expression hardened. Personally, he really hoped this wasn't the case. Maybe it's because my job changed at level 51, which meant his skills had possibly been upgraded after gaining exactly 50 levels. If this theory was correct, his next upgrade wouldn't be until he reached level 151. That would suck. Considering the speed at which he'd been leveling up lately, he was pinning his hopes on the former. The building where the guild office was located came into view, and he drove into the underground parking lot. Jinwoo was the only one in Bungo, the Ajin Guild's beloved van. Jinho had volunteered to stay behind at the gate to wrap things up. The raid may have been finished, but there was still the matter of handing over the loot they acquired to the brokers. As the one who'd contacted them in the first place, Jinho had wanted to see it through to the end. "Leave it to me, boss!" Jinwoo could practically hear Jinho's voice overflowing with confidence. "I wonder if he's doing a good job." It was great that the vice president was eager to get things done, but hiring experienced employees might be in their best interest. Jinwoo made up his mind to do so as he exited the parking lot. "Huh?" The hunter spotted a familiar face approaching the building. She in turn noticed Jinwoo as well. "Oh!" Hainshaw stopped in her tracks, seemingly surprised to see him. She backed away slowly, then turned and fled. "Huh?" The whole situation was absurd. Never mind why she was running away. Does she really think she can outrun me? Who did she think he was? Jinwoo's competitive nature flared, and he sprinted at full speed using flash. Time seemed to slow, but his surroundings zipped by as he darted past. He caught up with Hain in the blink of an eye. If I grab her from behind or bump into her, she could get hurt. Jinwoo took a flying leap and whirled around to face Hain in midair. He landed directly in front of her. Her escape route blocked, Hain faltered. Jinwoo grabbed her by both shoulders. "Ah!" The chase between the two S-rank hunters ended just like that. Hain couldn't look Jinwoo in the eyes. Puzzled, he softly asked, "Why did you run away as soon as you saw me? And if she was going to run away, why did you bother coming here?" If Hain wanted to avoid seeing Jinwoo that badly, she shouldn't have come in the first place. Hain's voice came out as a whisper. "My car is in the parking lot." Jinwoo recalled noticing an unfamiliar car parked there. The day she had visited the office after applying to join Jinwoo's guild, he had teleported them directly to the Hunters Association gymnasium, and she'd never returned to pick up her car. I guess she heard we had a raid today and assumed we'd be out. Unfortunately, she couldn't have predicted they'd complete an A-rank raid in just a couple of hours. As a result, they'd run into each other and ended up here. Hain wilted under Jinwoo's wordless gaze, so he gently sighed and let her go. "There's no need to run away from me," he told her, smiling. "People change their minds all the time. It happens." People's hearts were fickle in that they could lose interest in something just as fast as it had been sparked. There was no reason to go out of one's way to avoid others like that. Despite Jinwoo's reassurance, Hain wouldn't respond or raise her head. Maybe she doesn't feel like talking to me? Her mood might have soured after he accosted her. "Okay, well." With that, he made to leave, but Hain hurriedly grabbed the end of his sleeve before he could turn away from her. Hain could almost see question marks floating above the dashing hunter as he waited for her. After some hesitation, and with a great deal of difficulty, Hain finally managed to speak. "Could you spare me some of your time?" The woman who'd fled from him wanted to talk. Sensing his confusion, Hain hurriedly continued. "Hunter-bound men really wanted me to relay something to you." Jinwoo's expression shifted at the unexpected name. "To me?" Hain's head bobbed. "He had something to tell you regarding your abilities." There was no way. Jinwoo had never met Hunter Min when he was alive. The first and last time he'd ever interacted with him was when he had briefly made Hunter Min one of his shadow soldiers. Hunter Min had bravely fulfilled his duty, and Hain had been saved from the brink of death in the process. It was thanks to him that she and Jinwoo could be here talking to each other in this moment. But when had Hunter Min had a chance to leave a message with her? Jinwoo had never displayed his power in front of the man. He'd already passed by the time Jinwoo arrived as backup. This didn't make any sense. Seeing the doubt in his eyes, Haynes slowly continued. Hunter-sung, your power is... Hold on, please. Whether she was telling the truth or not, it wasn't something they should be discussing in the middle of the street. Jinwoo glanced at their surroundings. Let's find somewhere quiet to talk. Chairman Yu took the documents handed to him by his secretary. These are information from the investigation at Seoul Ilshin Hospital. That was where Jinwoo's mother had been hospitalized. Chairman Yu's gaze sharpened as he started scanning through the pages. A nurse entered her room in the morning to discover she'd woken up, and Hunter-sung was by her side? And another point of interest, the hospital had recommended a thorough evaluation of her condition, but Hunter-sung had insisted on having her discharged. Chairman Yu found himself shaking his head. That doesn't sound like him. Hunter-sung was a filial son who had risked his own life doing raids to pay his mother's medical bills. Yet he wanted her discharged without having her checked out first? It should have been the other way around. That meant Hunter-sung had already been certain about his mother's recovery. But how? The frown lines on Chairman Yu's face multiplied as he continued to read. Everything written about Hunter-sung was perplexing. The double dungeon incident, his sudden second awakening, his mother's recovery, and his unidentified ability that allows him to make countless minions. Too many coincidences meant that nothing was a coincidence. Everything about this was bothering Chairman Yu, and so he came to a decision. I need to meet with Hunter-sung. I will send someone for him today. No need. Surprised, Secretary Kim asked. Are you going to visit him yourself, sir? Think carefully about who the other party is. Secretary Kim had nothing to say to that. Vmm. Secretary Kim's cell phone vibrated as Chairman Yu turned back to the documents. Go ahead. With his boss's permission, Secretary Kim checked his cell to see a text message relaying some breaking news. Sir! Chairman Yu looked up. There seems to be a broadcast out of Japan. Would you like to see? Secretary Kim wasn't one to make a fuss over pointless matters, so if he brought it up, it was a matter worthy of attention. At Chairman Yu's nod, Secretary Kim turned on the large TV mounted on the wall. This is Special Correspondent Sungwoo Park. As you can see, the screen changed to show live footage of Japan's busiest neighborhood. Shinjuku, Tokyo, Japan. The liveliest area within the heart of Japan was cloaked in shadows. Everything on the street, from cars, bicycles, and even people, had come to a halt. The only movement was people getting out of their cars one by one. Despite the piling traffic, no one honked or yelled at fellow drivers. It was as if the neighborhood had become possessed by something. Their gazes were fixed on one thing. Oh shit! My God! An enormous gate hanging in the air was blocking out the sky. People couldn't hide their horror at the sheer size, its height rivaling that of a skyscraper. The usual hustle and bustle of the street was replaced by an uncomfortable, almost nauseating silence. The atmosphere at the Prime Minister's residence was suffocating. Croc! Unable to keep his temper in check, the Prime Minister threw the remote at the TV playing the news, cracking the screen. Prime Minister. His aides jumped to their feet, but then docilely sat back down under his glare. What does the Hunters Association have to say about this? Shigeo Matsumoto, the president of the Hunters Association of Japan, helplessly hung his head. Since his return from Korea, he had become quite haggard. The Prime Minister's face darkened. Damn it! A terrifying gate had appeared in the center of the capital city, but the association wasn't rising to the task. What do you mean? The association has no countermeasure for an S-rank gate appearing smack dab in the middle of Tokyo, demanded the leader of the nation. Instead of answering his outburst, The others gathered pressed their lips together and remained silent. Eventually, the Prime Minister flopped back into his seat, his expression pained, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Be honest with me, President Matsumoto." His finger pointed at the cracked TV screen. "What happens if it explodes?" "It'll all be over." Just as the Prime Minister had suspected. He wrapped his hands around his head and mumbled, "I see. So Tokyo is doomed because of a single gate." "That's not what I meant, sir." The Prime Minister looked up. President Matsumoto's voice was stripped of emotion. "I meant, it's over for Japan. Somewhere quiet." But as they scanned their surroundings, both Hain and Jinwoo grew flustered. Why are all these buildings? They were surrounded by establishments where a man and a woman entering together would raise some eyebrows. Jinwoo ended the awkward tension. "Since you have to pick up your car, should we go back to the office?" "Oh, that sounds good." Hain's blush, as she slowly nodded, struck Jinwoo as cute for a second. He turned in the direction of his office. "Shall we?" "Sure." The walk back served as a reminder that Hain was an S-rank hunter in her own right. We ran so far. Their brief chase had covered a distance that would take the average person 10 minutes to walk. They reached the third-floor office, and Jinwoo used his thumbprint to unlock the door. He headed toward the meeting room, but Hain lingered in the entryway. He shot her a questioning look. "Isn't it too dark in here?" Only then did Jinwoo notice how poorly illuminated the office was. This had been happening occasionally because darkness didn't affect Jinwoo's vision up to a certain point. Hain, however, didn't have that advantage. Click. Jinwoo flicked on the light switch. His guest looked around the bright office and carefully asked, "Is nobody else here?" "Our vice president is still at the raid site." "Are there only 2 people in your guild?" Hain noticed Jinwoo's indignant expression. Never mind. She was quickly learning that common sense didn't apply to the man in front of her. Wait a minute. Hain froze. "So we're the only 2 people in the building?" She realized she hadn't felt nervous like this in a long while. "It might be the first time since I became an awakened being." Hain was a cut above most S ranks, so how many men could make her restless? Her heart had begun palpitating ever since the proposal to go somewhere quiet. She let out a small laugh at feeling like a normal woman again instead of an S-rank hunter. Hee hee. Jinwoo watched Hain attempt to stifle a laugh. Is it that funny that there are only 2 people in the guild? He supposed that the situation might seem a bit silly to a member of the Hunters Guild, the #1 guild in Korea. Jinwoo shrugged it off and entered the meeting room, offering her a chair close to the door and sitting down across from her. Jinwoo waited until Hain had acclimated herself before getting back to the topic at hand. "So what happened?" The mood changed at his question. "How could Hunterman possibly leave you a message for me?" Jinwoo's expression was sincere. He didn't know much about Hunter Cha, but she didn't strike him as the type of person who would lie to get some attention. Consequently, he was ready to take her words seriously. Whether she was trying to dredge up the memory or figure out where to start, it took Hain a while to begin her tale. That day, Hain lifted her head and met his gaze. Tears welled in her kind eyes, and Jinwoo instantly realized where her story began. Hain softly continued, "I heard a voice." As Hain sank into the abyss, Byunga's hand shot down from above and grabbed her. "Hunter, men?" Byunga slowly nodded. Hain had to check several times that it was him, as he was clad in strange black armor from head to toe. If his face hadn't been uncovered, she wouldn't have recognized him. Hain asked, Where are we?" "I'm not sure either, but I do know what will happen if you let go." Hain was about to look down, but Byungu quickly stopped her. "No, don't." "Pardon?" Surprised, Hain looked back up at him. Byungu gravely explained, "If you look down, you may not be able to come back up." Hain sensed a longing exuding from him. Could it be? Her memories from before she lost consciousness came flooding back. The Jeju Island raid, the Queen Ant, and the unforeseen appearance of the terrifying monster ant. She felt something rapidly approaching her, and then darkness. "Did I die?" Byungu shook his head. "Not yet." "Then what about you, hunter men?" Byungu didn't answer. "We're running out of time, so let's skip the pleasantries." This was likely his last chance. If Byungu missed this opportunity, his message would be lost forever. He urgently told her, "Please relay this to Hunter Sung." Hunter Sung. Hain was bewildered by the change in topic. "He must be careful of the power he possesses." "What do you mean by that?" "I'm sure you realize by now that I was dead once. I fell to the bottom of the pit, but someone pulled me up from the endless darkness. And that person was... Yes, it was Hunter Sung." Hain didn't know how to process this information. Jinwoo might be a powerful hunter, but how could he revive a dead person? Byungu steadily recounted his experience. "But I wasn't myself. I was conscious, my identity restored, but it felt like I would do anything for him. Like I had become a loyal servant whose sole purpose was living for him." She swallowed hard as she took it all in. It was clear who Byungu was talking about. "It was frightening just how deliriously happy I was by that prospect." Byungu looked bitter. "Please let Hunter Sung know." His expression was grave. "His power is greater and more menacing than he knows. He must be made aware." Byungu recalled the eerie sight he'd been greeted by when he first transformed into a shadow soldier. He'd laid eyes on tens of thousands, perhaps even millions, of black-armored soldiers lined up behind him, wordlessly awaiting orders from their king. Just when Byungu met the gaze of the general positioned at the front of the army, he lost consciousness and opened his eyes to see Hain before him. He'd known then what was required of him, and that he needed to inform Jinwoo about the dreadful power he held. In the short time they'd been mentally connected, Byungu had seen the true nature of Jinwoo's ability and army. Byungu sensed he was out of time, so he yelled, "Please remember that Hunter Sung's army is..." A light shining from above engulfed Hain. Byungu's face hardened. "His true army is..." Alas, his cry echoed through the emptiness and faded away. That was the end of Hain's memories, and even those had only recently returned to her in a dreamlike blur. Jinwoo's expression had grown heavy as he listened. A soul close to death met a soul of the deceased? It was hard to believe. Perhaps this was a false memory of some kind created by post-traumatic stress due to coming so close to death? Jinwoo shared his theory. "I also considered that possibility." That's why she had waited a few days to mull it over before sharing it with Jinwoo. Jinwoo nodded in understanding, then handed her his cell. "Would you like to exchange numbers? I'd appreciate it if you could let me know right away if you recall anything else." Hain nodded. "Sure, I can do that." Her face looked a smidgen brighter than before. Japan immediately requested help from the international community. This was inevitable, since they had lost more than half of their S-rank combat power. However, the reception it received was cold. The international community hadn't forgotten that Japan had ignored the crisis in Korea, a neighboring country, and had stepped in to help only when the problem reached their shores. The United States never sent their S-rank hunters abroad anyway, but even China, the strongest nation of hunters in Asia, turned their backs. America washes hands of Japan. Will China merely watch Japan's demise? Second day of gate in Tokyo. The time remaining is... What will Korea do? The eyes of the world shifted to Japan, and provocative articles were published daily. Amid the fear and despair, one hunter offered Japan salvation, Yuri Orlov. The Russian S-rank hunter invited them to open negotiations with the Japanese government. President Matsumoto immediately flew to Russia. Yuri didn't bother meeting the Japanese representatives at the airport, choosing instead to greet them in the living room of his palatial mansion. "I'm Shigeo Matsumoto." A haughty middle-aged white male with blonde hair introduced himself. "Yuri Orlov. I'm sure you're already aware that I'm the best support-type hunter out there." They took a seat to begin their discussion. Prior to the meeting, Yuri had requested to be supplied with information about the gate. He started reviewing the documents as soon as they were handed to him. Time passed, and he nodded as he ran calculations in his head. 10 billion yen per day, and I'll block the gate as long as you wish. 10 billion yen a day? The Japanese representative stirred at the unreasonable fee, except President Matsumoto, who raised his hand to stop them. The Japanese hunters took a seat. "Looks like you and I can have a civilized conversation." As Yuri laughed, his gold tooth was on full display. 3,060 billion a year. That's what it'll take to save your country. It's not like I'm asking for 100 billion a day, right? What do you say? Pay 10 billion yen for your country or give up on your nation because you think that's too much? The richest man in the world was officially reported to own a little over 100 trillion yen. So 3 trillion yen a year wasn't an affordable price by any means. But it's a small price to pay for our country. President Matsumoto reached a decision. "We can pay your fee." "Good. I'll sign the contract, and you give me the signing bonus." Before that, Yuri stopped in the middle of telling his employee to bring out the contract and faced President Matsumoto. President Matsumoto politely requested something from the unreserved hunter. "May we please see a demonstration of your abilities?" When he heard the interpreter's translation, Yuri burst out in loud guffaws. "BWA ha 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 ha." With tears in his eyes from laughing so hard, he chortled. "Beggars can't be choosers. You're lucky I'm not asking you to lick my boots." Two of the Japanese S-rank hunters accompanying President Matsumoto could no longer stand the humiliation and leaped to their feet. "Gentlemen!" President Matsumoto hastily yelled, but they were already caught up in the heat of the moment. Bam! Thud! The Japanese S-rank hunters were immobilized by an invisible wall boxing them in. They looked like two mice caught in a jar as they exchanged looks of surprise. Yuri snickered. "Come on out if you can. You won't be able to move one step without my permission when you're in there." Yuri Orlov was an expert in creating such barriers. The Japanese party was stunned by this display of power. Yuri sneered and repeated his offer. "I'll block the S-rank gate for 10 billion a day, and as a bonus, I'll let these two live. Do we have a deal?" His gold tooth glimmered under the lights of the room. He had the ability to trap two S-rank hunters without lifting a finger. "I suppose our best option currently is to put our faith in this man." Matsumoto slowly nodded. "May I make a quick call?" "Of course." The next day, Yuri Orlov's name made international headlines.